We are partners with the Mozilla Foundation in the Badges for Lifelong Learning competition and the Teacher Mastery and Feedback competition. Joining me in hosting this webinar is Carla Casilli of Mozilla's Open Badges and David Theo Goldberg, Executive Director of the Digital Media and Learning Research Hub. They're going to be talking to you. Carla will be giving a presentation on designing badge systems, and David is going to help answer questions about the process of applying. And I'll be moderating questions. And for those of you who want to participate in real time, you can go to Twitter. Our Twitter hashtag is DMLBadges, hashtag DMLBadges. And for those of you who are participating by web, you can submit questions via the chat box. You should see that on your screen. If you miss part of today's webinar and want to dial back and listen, we will be archiving the webinar on dmlcompetition.net blog. If you go to the site and you look at the blog, you should see it being posted in the next couple of days. And just a reminder that the deadline for Stage 2 of the Teacher Mastery and Feedback Badge competition is February 3rd, 2012 at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I realized today this is our 8th webinar. Carla's going to be answering general questions about designing badge systems and models. And we want to make sure everyone receives fair treatment, so we won't be able to provide feedback on your specific proposal, but if you have general questions, we're more than happy to address those. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this over to Carla, who's going to talk about badges, systems, model, and design. We'll give Carla a couple seconds to unmute.
Great, there you go. I am now unmuted. Thank you so much, Cheryl. And let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so thanks everybody for attending this webinar. Today I'm going to talk to you about the preparation of badge system models and design, and hope to cover all of the questions that you have. Right now, let's actually just get started with the document. So Stage 2 is really about badge system proposals, and what I'm going to try to do on this webinar is talk you through what we think about when we're talking about badge systems, and then kind of the full implications of those. And I will also step you through some thoughts about that, and also step you through some work that we have done in order to think about that. So hopefully it'll help you put into perspective ways that you can write your proposals for the Stage 2. So Stage 2 is about aligning with content from Stage 1, and so there are winning submissions for the badges for teachers that are currently on the dmlcompetition.net website. And obviously you've probably all taken a look at that. And there's a slight quirk in the way that the competition works, in that you can actually enter with content from your own idea for Stage 2, but eventually it will need to be wrapped back into Stage 1 content. So if you are chosen as a Stage 2 winner, you actually will work with Stage 1 content. So that's just the representation of showing you the website on that page. So what goes into a badge system? So there's lots of things that go into a badge system, and I'm going to try to clarify how you can think about it from a bunch of different standpoints rather than just being overwhelmed by all of the content on the website. So a few things that we're going to talk about are badges, and badges from a variety of perspectives. Then also assessment and criteria. What is the content that goes into developing a badge system? How do people get them awarded? And then what are things that support that, the development of that system? So technologies, environments, interactions with people from organizations and groups. And please note that it is important that you think about all of these ideas, but they don't have to be entirely worked out. That's really what Stage 3 is about. If you're selected as a Stage 2 winner, you can then work in conjunction in teams, and then you can hammer out and more crisp up the ideas that you're thinking about. So a little bit about Mozilla's Open Badge infrastructure. That's what OBI stands for. The Open Badge infrastructure is really just a standard. It's kind of a micro format for people to start developing badge systems. And all of the badge systems will eventually plug into the Open Badge infrastructure. At this stage 3, we are we are requiring that your badges be interoperable. And what interoperable is kind of a very large word. But essentially it means that it will work in conjunction with other badge systems. And that actually is taken care of. If you plug into the OBI, then you actually are interoperable at that point. And hopefully we're going to be extending the value of just a single badge system through Mozilla's Open Badge infrastructure. So because we're suggesting this micro format and this standard, what that does is automatically allow badge systems to start to live in the same kind of ecosystem. So so organizations like very small groups and very large academic institutions can also start to have badges that people understand have an actual representation that gets pinged back to the content originally proposed. So let's talk a little bit about interoperability. As I mentioned, it's essentially the badge metadata specification. Metadata, also another really large word. Metadata is really the content that you see on your screen right there. It's essentially content that gets embedded within the badge. So when we talk about the way that Mozilla works with badges, we actually have a visual representation of that badge, and then there is content embedded within that badge, so that when that badge moves around on the internet, all of that content goes with it. And it's essentially the interfacing technology that allows badges to get pushed into the Open Badge infrastructure. And I'm kind of skimming over some of the complexity here. It's actually a really simple concept in that we're developing this standard. The standard actually takes all of the content that you develop as issuers and embeds it within that badge, and then that badge always has that content. So badges are not just a visual representation of learning or education or skills or competencies. It's actually a verified representation of learning and skills and competencies. And then there's also the authentication pathway, which is essentially the issuing organization saying, hey, we actually did issue this badge. So we're trying to ensure that we reduce the concept of gaming as much as possible. So let's take a look at some badge system models now that we kind of have a good understanding of the way the Open Badge infrastructure works. So badge system models, we're really going to talk about 3 here. Obviously there are many kinds of badge system models, but we'll cover 3 here. So if you have an alternative to this in your proposal, perfectly okay. So the 3 that we'll talk about are training or leveling systems, dynamic dossier systems, and social systems. And let me just jump right into that. So let's jump into the training and leveling system. Training and leveling systems are really skill-based. They're trying to assess how much content people are learning as they move along. And there are kind of clear criteria for reward so that people know exactly what the next steps are. And they can represent proof of skills learned. In its own way, it kind of represents a trajectory of advancement, so people can see how they're improving bit by bit. They're kind of working up a scale. And some examples of these are first aid training, scuba diving, and for another online example, the P2P School of Webcraft and Khan Academy. And let me just take a minute to talk about the examples too. Because the Open Badge infrastructure is online, I think people sometimes mistakenly assume that that means that all of the learning or skills and competencies have to occur online, and that is not the case. That they can all happen offline and then be represented digitally by a digital badge. So just keep that in mind as you move along, and you consider how this might wrap into the badges for teachers. So some of the badges that you're thinking about in development don't necessarily have to be things that teachers do online, but can instead be things that are soft skills or mentor skills, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through the presentation. The dynamic dossier is about tracking ongoing performance. So it's kind of similar to the previous system that we just talked about, but it's probably a lot more in depth. It's computationally based, so it has a lot of content associated with it, a lot of metrics probably associated with it as well. Sometimes they have rich visualizations, and by that I mean dashboards, so that people can then track things track content and learning achievements as they move through. And some examples of those are Stack Overflow and Top Coder. Those are probably run across those yourself in your travels through the web. Social systems are the third aspect of badge systems that we'll talk about today. And what those do is they kind of pick up on all of the soft skills that exist out there. So they help to support community interaction. They help to reinforce mentorships and personal relationships. They really focus on the idea of recognizing that there's peer interaction, and that they help to support concepts of reputation, and they also help to really reinforce community values. And that becomes really important, and I think this might play in extremely well to the badges for teachers, because the community values and it starts to help define what is valued within a system. So keep this social systems idea in mind as you start to think about badges for teachers. Examples for there are Stack Overflow and Golala. Let's now take a step back and think about the badge system's characteristics, actually step forward and take about consideration of the badge system characteristics. So as you've seen on the website already, there's actually a whole list of content to take into consideration, a whole bunch of different areas of interest. And these are some things that we just want you to consider as you step through designing a badge system. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive list. There's lots of content within that list, but also lots of things that we have not addressed. Within what we would like you to do as you kind of step through some of these things, and I will actually step through them in the presentation, is thinking about them specifically. And let me just move forward so we can do that. So from a content and skills question, what is the main domain? So what are people learning? What are the badges for? What are the badges? What skills are covered? In particular, are there technical skills being covered? Are these specific quantitative skills, or skills that can be assessed quantitatively, or are these skills that are qualitative can be assessed qualitatively? So, and from that standpoint, it's kind of hard and soft skills. And soft skills are those skills I mentioned a little earlier, so peer and community-based skills. Then are these skills discrete, or are they continuing? Do people learn things once and then they move on, or is this something that people can continually re-up on, or that they can build upon once they move forward? Scarcity and granularity really starts to address the idea of how often do these these badges get awarded. Do people get them frequently? Do they start to get them like once every few times they interact with a certain aspect of the work? So in this instance, let me just talk about the two images that are up there. Sun badges are epic. So the sun badges mean that this is a really difficult problem that you've attacked, and that you've achieved it. And these are both Khan Academy badges. Black hole badges, from that standpoint, they are unique in that they're really hard to get. So what's happening there is Khan is actually starting to address the idea of scarcity. Now, from a granularity standpoint, it is possible, and granularity, by that I mean, can we get really specific about the content that is being learned or the skills being assessed? So instead of saying that there might be some course that some teacher has gone through, can we start to recognize that that teacher has started to do things specifically with an individual student, or that they have they've written some software themselves? So how complex is the badge, or can you move it all the way down to really basic skills that people are being rewarded for? Then, addressing that same concept, what are the levels of badges, and are there prerequisites? Do badges aggregate? And so let's take a minute to talk about those. Levels of badges, essentially what we're getting at there is perhaps you're thinking about one specific badge, or you're starting from a small standpoint. And it's helpful to start from a small standpoint that you can get your arms around. And then, can the badges be built upon? So when you're developing the system, can you think far enough in advance about how the system itself might grow? Is this a badge system that eventually may become superseded by another series of badges? Do badges work together to start to come together so that, let's say you have 3 badges, and that actually means that you open up possibilities to get another badge. So there's kind of a gating effect that you can think about too from the badge standpoint. And then what are the pathways that the badges start to emphasize within your own organization? So how do they start to reinforce the values that you'd like to see? Role, identity, and opportunity. Essentially what we're talking about here is what roles or identities do the badges start to represent? Can people start to understand what the pathway is within your organization, or what, and for this instance, how teachers might be able to progress forward using this system of badges? And what stories can people start to tell about themselves relating to the badges? So if there's a way for you to do a representative of this, let's say this is Shalimar and she's a teacher and she has done these things, so that you kind of just have a template to build upon, so you can use some personas in building the concept of the way that the badges may work. And a little bit that I talked about before is what kind of opportunities or privileges get unlocked once you start to move through badges. So not only do badges start to build upon one another, but then do badges also start to give people different opportunities within their environments. So also from a performance and assessment standpoint, what are the criteria for the badges? What goes into thinking about badges? And then how will you assess that? Will there be some standard metrics? Will it be peer assessment? Will it be some kind of additional individual qualitative assessment? There's lots of things to think about when we're talking about performance and assessment. And getting back to the Open Badge infrastructure, the Open Badge infrastructure actually does request what is the content related to the badge, essentially why does this badge exist. So we will help you along that line when you're thinking about the badges, because there actually does need to be metadata associated with this content. But essentially what we're really hoping for is that you start to think about it from what is an authentic value that gets communicated through this, and so that people who are receiving these badges can completely understand, oh, well, this badge has merit and I value it myself. Then the question of permanence, how long does a badge last? Because you do have the opportunity to have badges expire, and this is something that I think makes a lot of sense for the badges for teachers. Do teachers get assessed and then they need to get reassessed in order to keep the badge? So while badges don't disappear in someone's backpack, they actually can expire, and then people can re-up them. So exactly how do people go about that? How can people renew their badge or increase upon their badge? Portability and transparency is about thinking how does this content in the badge system translate out into the general world? Do people understand why this badge exists? Is it valued outside of a specific community? Is it valued really deeply in one community but doesn't necessarily need to be valued outside of that community? What is the ultimate goal that you would like the badges to achieve? Is it that it is personally rewarding, or is it that it becomes socially rewarding or professionally rewarding? And from that standpoint, how does that content get communicated? Does it get communicated within the representation of the badge itself? Does it get communicated within the metadata or the explanation of why the badge exists? So keep all of these things in mind as you're thinking about how badge systems, how it makes sense to develop a badge system. Now the question of gaming actually comes up quite a bit, and I will give you the short answer. Almost every system is gamed. However, it is possible to be protected against gaming of badge systems, particularly because the Open Badge infrastructure requests all of that metadata, and also requests that issuers essentially sign their badges so that people know when they click on them, they can be taken back to a URL that takes them back to the issuing organization or group. So the Open Badge infrastructure kind of helps in some of the gaming, but please try to take that into account. Like if your badges start to develop a huge amount of value, then there's going to be an increased desire to game that badge system. And that's perfectly okay. It means you're doing really well. But at the same time, if there are aspects you can build into the badge system so that that happens less frequently, that's a fantastic thing to think about. Endorsement is an area I have not yet addressed. Endorsement is really if a third party would take a look at your badges, and let's say the badges for teachers here, what might they look for? What would be the value that they would look for? So would endorsement add value? So if the third party were to sign your badge, for example, let's say if NASA decided to start signing some of the teachers' badges, what exactly would they look for? And would an endorsement add value? Can you start to think about different organizations that would add value to your badge system? Who might endorse it, and what criteria do you think they would be looking for? This helps to put your badge system into perspective, so instead of thinking very internally or becoming really self-focused, you can start to think about how does this start to work in a social economy? How do people start to think about things from a social standpoint, and also from a standpoint of different endorsers? That is something the Open Badge infrastructure will be working towards and providing within the year 2012. And most importantly, not perhaps most importantly, but certainly very important, is the design of the badges. So what do the badges look like? And I kind of defaulted to most importantly because it's extremely important that your badge be visually appealing, because that will be the first thing that people will see and will have the first response to. And so there are lots of things to consider when you think about design. Is there an overall theme for your badge system? Are badges all one-off? Is there a branding that is taken into account? Then if this is one specific badge system for, let's say, one school environment, does it modify as you move through different environments? If, let's say, one school district uses a specific kind of badge, does it alter once it moves to another school district, or is this kind of a universal design? So there's on this screen a whole bunch of different visualizations of the way some badges might look. But obviously these are all different. And so when you think about it, think of it from a family standpoint. Do things, they don't necessarily have to look exactly alike, but maybe they want to look like they're in a related family. The team question is actually an interesting question, and badge systems are relatively complex, so there's not really just one individual who can produce an entire badge system. What might the implementation team look like? Do you need a technical person? Do you need a designer? Do you need an educational assessment person? Do you need an educational psychology person? Are there gaps in your team? It's perfectly okay if there are gaps in the team. Just have thought about that and think about who might be the gaps or where they might exist. Technology is one other aspect of a badge system, and that is really about the issuing systems. A lot of that is taken care of with the Open Badge infrastructure. However, there are ways that you will need to plug into the Open Badge infrastructure, and that's really essentially a matter of understanding software and developing widgets. Now, there's ongoing work with the Open Badge infrastructure of people who are currently working on widgets for plugging into the Open Badge infrastructure. And they exist in Drupal and in Django, also in Ruby on Rails. And if you go to our Google group, which is Open Badges, you can actually take a look at in there, or if you have any questions, that's a good place to start about specific development questions. Here I'm just going to talk a little bit about the work that we did with Peer-to-Peer University, and that was about developing our first badge system. So this piloted last year, between January and April of last year, 2011. And School of Webcraft is really, it's a work of between Mozilla and also Peer-to-Peer University. And for those of you who are not familiar with Peer-to-Peer University, it is an online peer-based learning environment. And so the work that we did there was trying to develop a series of Webcraft or WebMaker badges. And here you can see some of the thinking that we did about working on the beta badge system, and there were a whole bunch of different concepts that we were taking into consideration. So essentially what we were thinking about, and I will quickly go through the content and skills. So essentially all of the things that I just talked about that we would like you to take into consideration are things that we actually took into consideration during the building of the School of Webcraft badges. So here are content and skills. We actually divided things up into skill badges versus community badges. Skill badges were technical requirements. What did you understand technically or learn as you went through the School of Webcraft? The community-based badges were essentially peer-reviewed badges. Were you a good mentor? Were you a great problem solver? Were you a good communicator? Were you a great community builder? And these are valuable characteristics for people to have. but they often are the things that get left in the dust. So the more that your badge system can build in the soft skills and recognizing that all of these human interaction skills are vitally important, the better off the badge system can be. So scarcity and granularity, we actually thought a lot about how scarce or granular to make this, and we erred on the side of relatively not granular. And that's something we're actually rethinking. So we went with kind of a very rough cut for awarding badges, and in particular the JavaScript and PHP badges. So we went for a higher level, so we went with really rough cuts about the division of learners. But as we move forward, we're going to work backwards towards a more granular level and ensure that the content that is learned actually represents really basic skills. And this is really about the levels I was just talking about. So basic versus expert. We went for really, really simple basic expert, and we distributed just a Webmaking 101 badge. So we just were getting our feet wet, essentially, and I think that's what you'll be doing as well, is just trying to figure out what are the basics of a badge system, and then how do we go about starting to implement that. And it's one of those interesting problems that the more that you start to focus on it, the more expansive all of the questions are. And that's terrific because it starts to work into all of the value systems that you are working with within any institution or organization. From our standpoint, we went roles and identity also ties into levels from our standpoint. So we just went with basic versus expert. And then we also had this area that we called gurus, and those were organizations, actually people, who had achieved a level of expertise. They had achieved the expert level, and when they were gurus, they could actually become peer assessors. So we started to think about how the badge system started to interact and how it started to mold the community as well. And we are now also working on the Webmaker badge. And here we're just, it's just a visual of all of the kind of assessment that we went through thinking about that and all of the challenges that were associated. So we had challenges that led up to badges. So from a curriculum standpoint, we were developing a whole bunch of content that people had to complete before they actually got badges awarded. So the granularity there wasn't necessarily, there was the content was granular, but the badges were a little more rough cut. And here you can take a look at the visuals that we were working with performance and assessment. So we actually described what was within the JavaScript badge and what people had to do in order to achieve that badge. And the content on the lower right is essentially what one person did in order to achieve that badge. Permanence was an area that we took into consideration, and this also addresses the idea of expiration. Since we came to the conclusion that a lot of hard skills wouldn't necessarily, hard skills would expire, but soft skills wouldn't. So what that meant is, in this instance, because we were developing specific software badges and JavaScript and also PHP, that it's perhaps that information could become stale at some point, and it would need to be re-upped. But from a standpoint of community and interaction, personal interaction, that's probably pretty unlikely that that would shift from community to community. So those badges would not expire. And we are currently working on ways that skills and badges could be updated or refreshed. So portability and transparency here, this is all about the idea of the content that is being developed. Can other people see it as people start to do the learning process, or does it become a really private interaction and the only information that gets released to the public is the final badge award? Here you can see Zoozle was doing a lot of work. And then portability transparency ties into how the Open Badge infrastructure works. So while the badges get awarded, they always default to private. Once they move into the backpack, the Mozilla Open Badge infrastructure backpack, then the learner or recipient has the opportunity to make them public. So always defaulting to private, but then they can push it from the Open Badge infrastructure out into the general public. So they can put the badge on their Facebook page, they can put it on a developer website, they can use it on personal sites as well. So how does your badge system do that? Does it move, and where would you like to see it represented? protection, this is really about how do we ensure that the content isn't gamed. And because we have such a pretty specific description of what the badge is, and then how the code and the representation of the learning is pretty well documented, we've guaranteed that these badges are very difficult to game. So endorsement, we actually, Mozilla endorsed the peer-to-peer university badges, but we are considering other potential partnerships to start the endorsing concept. So here we have on the graphic, we actually have MIT, so open courseware from MIT. So does it make sense for you to start thinking about other endorsers? We certainly are thinking about that ourselves. The design here was we had to work in two different kinds of brands. We had to work in both the Mozilla brand and the peer-to-peer university brand. So thinking about how do your brands start to interact if more than one brand actually owns the badge. And then what are the colors and shapes? Do you want to have a specific color that all of your badges are, or do you want to have a color that gets recognized as an X kind of badge? Are there shapes that move between different kinds of badges, or is there one overall shape that then gets modified just through color and content and iconography? And the way that Mozilla worked on this, obviously, as I mentioned, it was not a one-person job. We had an assessment and curriculum person, we had a content person, we had 2 developers, we had a product/project manager and a community manager, and we also worked directly with a community. So it was an ongoing experiment. And as I mentioned, because we actually piloted it essentially twice, so January and April, so we were out there kind of testing out our theories about how things would work too. Technology is really about plugging into the open badge infrastructure and then ensuring that all of that content can move outward. And that pretty much wraps up the presentation. For stage 2, the proposals are due February 3rd, 2012, as Cheryl mentioned, so 5 p.m. Pacific and then 8 p.m. Eastern. And I will pass the content back to Cheryl.
Thank you, Carla. That was fantastic. I believe we also have been joined by David Theo Goldberg. He was not, I don't think he was on the webinar at the very beginning. So David, I just wanted to say hello and let everybody know you're with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And thanks,
So
Carla, for that great overview.
And so we're going to jump into questions. We have a couple of different categories. Some questions are going to be more technical and some are going to be a little bit about the process of applying. So I'm going to go through the questions that we have here and we'll be jumping around a little bit. Feel free to ask your questions on Twitter using the DML badges hashtag. So you would go to Twitter and look for hashtag DML badges and ask your question using that hashtag, and also you can ask questions in the chat box for our webinar, and I'll try to get to those as best I can. One of the first questions is going to be a technical question. Carla, if you could talk about the context of the term gaming. If someone games your badge system, does that mean that they have decided to use it in an authorized setting?
Interesting question. Yep. So I will say the short answer to that is I would say no. When I talk about gaming, what I mean is essentially if different nefarious groups or individuals decide that your badge has value and they don't want to go through the process of earning that badge because every badge here is earned, then they will attempt to spoof the badge. And by spoof, I mean they'll tend to just represent it visually and not necessarily include all of the content. Or they may actually go to the trouble to try to put that content within the badge. But because of the way that the open badge infrastructure works, where the content gets embedded within the graphic, it will be difficult to game the system. So it will be easy to have a visual representation of a badge if people are, adept at Photoshop or they're adept at some other, or Illustrator, then they can visually represent the badge, but that it is not an accurate representation. And when people click on it, because that's part of the design of the badge system, Mozilla's open badge system, when they click on it, they won't be taken back to the original issuing agency. So when they don't get taken back, people will be able to see that it is actually a false badge. And when people use them properly, when they actually get, instead of gaming, so when the badges really are properly issued and then they get sent to the Open Badge Infrastructure Backpack, then when they move out into the overall world, so that when they move out into Facebook and they move out into your WordPress site or your blog, then when people click on them properly, then or when they're properly created, then when they click on them, they actually do get taken back to the issuing organization, and people can see A, who the issuer was, B, who the recipient is, see why the badge exists, so what is the content associated with that badge, and then we actually have a variety, and see if the badge expires, so that's an optional aspect. And then also, if people, if issuers desire, they can include what we call an evidence URL. And what the content is there is essentially all of the content that the learner or recipient had to do in order to get the badge. So you saw that a little earlier on our School of Webcraft, where it was in the lower right-hand corner of the content that people were showing. This is all the content I did in order to learn this JavaScript badge, so that there's content associated with it.
Great, thank you, Carla. David, I think this next question is probably a good one for you. It sounds like this person is a Stage 2 applicant for the badges competition, and the question is, if we applied to Stage 2 for the badge system in the badge competition, will we know if we are a winner before the February 3rd application deadline?
Probably not. We are looking to announce the winners early in February, but it might linger a little bit, and you should be encouraged to apply also to the teacher badge Stage 2. We're not doing this in order to encourage you to apply to teacher badges, but just the timeline will, it'll be close, but probably not overlap.
And for anybody who has asked questions,
if people are, sorry, Cheryl. If I can second what David said, if people are interested in entering, they have entered already for the badges competition and they are intrigued by the badges for teachers, please feel free and do not feel compelled that you can only have to enter one or the other. So if you have already previously entered the badges competition and you are interested in the badges for teachers competition, please feel free to enter again.
Yeah, correct.
Great, thank you both. The next question is, are there lessons learned out there about designing badges for specific ages or for motivating people to do certain tasks, for example?
That is a great question and a very huge question. And I think that there's a lot of design research that goes into the way that people perceive things. I mean, you're asking actually a series of questions with that one question. I think it's about design psychology. You're asking about perception. You're asking about like traditional psychology. And there's a huge amount of research in the way that people perceive things. There's all kind of research about the sense of fluency, which is if you perceive something to be simpler, you have a tendency to like it better. If you are, but it's also possible if things are what we call disfluent, and by that I mean it's more difficult to comprehend. Sometimes that actually helps engage people because they tend to pay more attention to things. It's very hard to answer that in a simple way. There is content. We at Mozilla are working on trying to ensure that as people start to develop badge systems, they have an understanding of some of the research out there, and that is one of the areas that we hope to address. So that's kind of a long answer to yes to yes.
Thank you, Carla. The next question is a follow-up. When we do announce the winners for the two badge competitions, so for Badges for Lifelong Learning and the Teacher Mastery and Feedback, will these winners also be competing in late February in San Francisco? David, that's a good one for you.
Yes, everybody will be brought to San Francisco at the end of all the Stage 3 competitors will be brought to San Francisco for the 28th and 29th of February. And effectively the 1st of March, when the overall winners of the competition will be announced live at the Mozilla Science Fair at the Digital Media and Learning Competition the evening of March 1.
Well, we have a lot of questions for you today, David. We've got another one. If we've already approached a stage 1 winner and they're willing or eager to work with us, is that appropriate to include is that appropriate information to include in the proposal?
If the meaning is a stage 1 teacher mastery winner, the answer is yes, absolutely. You should identify that. You can do one or both of two things. You can identify the designated learning content teacher mastery winner and say you're working with them, or you can say you're willing to create a badge system generically that would apply to a whole range of possibilities. Or you could do both. You could say your designated stage 1 learning content winner is a person you're working with, but your badge system would apply more generically, and you'd be open also to working with others. So you have 3 options in that case.
Okay, thanks, David. Carla, I think this is a good one for you. When will the OBI be launched?
A great question. When will the OBI be launched? So right now we are currently in what we call developer preview. We are moving towards beta. And for those of you who are not familiar with that kind of software lingo, essentially that means that developer preview is essentially so that other developers can take a look at our content, and so that we can ensure that we're not losing any content as we move along. Then when we move to beta, it becomes kind of publicly available. Now, it actually is publicly available, but beta means it's a little more stable prior to the final release. So currently, the issuer API, and I'm going to talk some software for a little bit, the issuer's APIs are available, and we should have those completely firmed up by the end of January. It is worth noting that you can always take a look at where we stand from a software standpoint. If you go to our tech documentation, there's a link directly to our GitHub repository, which is where all of our development is ongoing. And then if the issuer API is the first major aspect to be completed, then we will move on to the displayer API that I haven't really talked about on this webinar. And then from there, we will move on to the endorser API. But we should be completed by the end of the first quarter, so we're aiming for a completion and a launch from end of the first quarter in 2012. And at the end of 2012, our goal is to have all of this be completely documented so that it becomes entirely self-service, so that people can they can take our code and they can bring it in-house, they can fork it, so it actually is federated software. And then we also will have it fully documented so that anybody will be able to take our content and develop a badge system and find best practices that we have been researching or learning as we move through this process as well.
Thank you, Carla. That was a good explanation. The next question is, referring to the website in the technology section in phase 2, the info page says that in most cases a badge system will reflect interactions and experiences that occur both off and online. Could you please discuss how you see offline interactions working with regard to badges?
I touched a little bit on that during my presentation. I want to ensure that people understand that the Open Badge infrastructure is a digital representation of learning and skills and competencies. And those learnings and skills and competencies do not need to occur online. So, for example, you can have a series of cooking badges that leads to a chefdom. And none of that is going to happen online, but the badges themselves are representations of all of that learning and those skills that people are acquiring as they move through different lessons and as they gain more experience becoming a chef. So what the badge systems do is capture all of that learning. And this is, I think, gets to kind of a philosophical thinking about open badges in general. And that is ensuring that while people can, they do attend academic institutions and they can go through traditional academic arcs in their lives. Learning does not end when people walk out of a 4-year or 6-year or 2-year or 3-year institution. And what the effort of the Open Badge infrastructure is to ensure that all of that informal learning and formal learning gets captured, and so that it doesn't get lost. Because people are learning things all the time. People are teaching themselves online. People are going to classes. They're going to continuing ed classes that aren't necessarily online classes. They might be learning about statistics through a book instead of online, and all badge systems are being designed to capture those different experiences.
Great. Okay, the next question, is there a preferred type of assessment approach or pedagogy for designing badge systems? We would like to be very experimental, but not if it makes us non-competitive.
I like this question.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it does address what we would like to do, which is kind of push the boundaries in some ways about what's possible. So we've been talking kind of specifically in some ways in a very conservative manner about badges. But badges can operate in a bunch of different environments. So if there's value that the badges are way unusual and wacky and quirky, and it makes sense within that community, then absolutely they should look like that. And if they expand people's perception about what's possible with badges, we are completely behind that. So please feel free to be experimental. This is certainly an opportunity to do so.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, this one is a couple of sentences. I'm thinking about elementary and middle school students playing a game that includes trophies and badges. Can finishing one level in a game be considered as a badge, and would it be suitable to the Mozilla's badge system?
If I understand the question correctly, I think the short answer is yes. It certainly makes sense. If you can start to wrap in kind of interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary learning, that's fantastic. If you can tie together things that are happening online so that some things are happening online, some things are happening through books, some things are happening through games, and all of this can be represented within a badge system, more power to you. So I think it makes a lot of sense, too, if you're starting to think about how things interact with one another. So how do badges start to represent learning or skills and competencies that kind of start to step a little outside of what is traditional learning? And if it becomes game-based learning, sure. And if the badges can start to move into the games themselves, that's also fantastic.
Great, thank you. Does the OBI allow for badge transfer similar to transfer of credits from one educational system to another?
So does the badge system allow for transfer of credits? I think there are actually two questions there. One that I will address a little bit later, which is can badges start to represent, can they become accredited? And then can badges move around? This kind of ties into the idea of endorsement. If badges start to gain value within certain ecosystems or environments, let's say a community college develops a series of badges, and all of a sudden another four-year university starts to take a look at those badges and they see value within them, then it would make sense for the four-year institution to start endorsing those two-year community college badges. And then perhaps if we start moving out of the idea of this kind of traditional arc of going from one academic institution to another, but we start to realize that sometimes the badges may actually start to gain enough value so that they can act on their own, and that all of this different informal learning can start to be captured, then we can start to think about what might be the future of education and how can we start to make sure that what is being offered at those universities and colleges represents what people feel like they want to know. Now, I think the other question embedded within that is, can badges start to represent academic representations towards accreditation or towards diploma and certificates? And that is something that Mozilla is currently in discussions with. There is a lot of research ongoing right now, and there are a lot of efforts to ensure things, in particular within the open education environment, about how certificates and diplomas might be awarded based on badges. So I know that the Open University is certainly looking into some of these concepts, and as I mentioned, the open education resource world is very much intrigued by starting to be able to take different courses and different coursework from a bunch of different organizations, a bunch of different academic institutions, and kind of be able to gather them all together and have them be this kind of brand new concept of a diploma. So all of these things can be aggregated across a variety of different academic institutions, and then they together can constitute the equivalent of a diploma.
Okay, thank you, Carla. The next question is referring to the idea of portfolios, e-portfolios. Is the presentation of a portfolio something that makes a badge system more or less competitive? Should we build this idea out as much as possible?
These are great questions. Another great question. So should you build out the concept of an e-portfolio? This is also an ongoing conversation that we are having with different organizations, and when I say we, I mean Mozilla, about the idea of e-portfolios are they're becoming fairly common in the kind of overall academic parlance. And so can we start to make sure that the portfolio starts to get linked to badges? And in its own way, badges can kind of be considered as kind of mini portfolios. So because they constitute information that represents learning and skills and competencies, so every time someone clicks on a badge, they're actually getting, they do not have to get, depends on the issuers whether or not they provide this, but they can get their content associated with that badge. So in essence, a collection of badges can actually become an e-portfolio. So hopefully they'll be able to work in concert with one another.
Excellent, thank you. David, this is, I guess you could consider this an old standard, a favorite that we've had a couple of times. Can you talk a little bit about the matchmaking process? Will Stage 1 winners be guaranteed to be matched with a Stage 2 winner?
We will and are doing our best to ensure that. We can't absolutely ensure it. It will depend on the quality of Stage 2 applicants. The best way to guarantee yourself, if you're a Stage 1 winner, that you get paired is to find yourself a really effective really effective badge designer, developer, badge system designer, developer, and get them to apply with you in mind to Stage 2. As I say, we will do our very best. We'll go the extra step to try to ensure to make the matches happen. But short of actually getting quality Stage 2 applications, we can't absolutely guarantee it. So please be encouraged to reach out to any any badge and badge system developer designer that you might know, and encourage them to work with you and to submit an application as a proposed partnership.
I should also add, too, for anybody who is a Stage 2 potential applicant who's looking for Stage 1, you can leave comments on their applications on dmlcompetition.net if you want to communicate with them and are having a hard time tracking down who's in charge of the project. And also there have been groups on Twitter using the hashtag DML badges, trying to find each other and looking for potential pairings in case you need another avenue to try.
Cheryl, can I just add something, and that's that there are applications to Stage 2, both at the for the general badge competition and for the teacher mastery Stage 2 competition, who are proposing more generic systems of badges. And it might be the case that if there's not a one-to-one match, in some instances that we might propose bundling. Stage one a range of stage one content with stage two badge developer designer, not in the sense of forcing stage one folks to work together, to potentially water down your stage one content. That's not the point. The point is that there might be a stage two badge developer designer who would be able to work with a range of individualized stage one content.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. That's good information for people to have.
Yeah.
The next question.
Before you go on, Cheryl, I should just emphasize, as we've done in the past, that whatever matches we propose, whether it's one-to-one or many-to-one in the way I've just outlined, people will be given a chance to sort of vet, veto any proposed working arrangement. Vetoing just means that if you match with somebody that you really don't want to work with, you can say, I'm not prepared to work with that person. That might be at risk of not then having a match, but we're not forcing anybody into working.
Great, good to know. Thank you, David. The next question is a technical question. How technical should we be in our stage two proposals? For example, at the software system level, will the reviewers be looking for concrete resolutions to technical problems or not?
A good question. Will the reviewers be looking for concrete solutions? If you can provide concrete solutions, that will certainly help your proposal. It is not a requirement. When you do pitch, if you are selected as a stage two winner and you get teams together with a stage one winner, then you actually have the month of February to work together to develop a more robust representation of what that software thinking might be. It is not a requirement. And because you will then have 1 year to implement, so some of these questions, and that's part of the reason I mentioned it early on in my presentation, they need to have been given thought to, but they don't need to be completely hammered out. It is good to at least have some reference to the software needs and requirements on your entry. If you don't mention it at all, that will really, it doesn't help. So it only helps to actually have some content on there. And it's possible to have really in-depth representation, like if you have a widget already in development that works with the OBI, or if you are working in conjunction with an organization that is really adept from a technical standpoint and you want to include that, please feel free to do so. But it does not have to be like, here's the software we're thinking about, and you don't have to provide code specifically.
Great, thank you. What are you expecting to see in supplementary materials is the next question.
So I think any of the content, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Any of the content that you feel that you haven't been able to express in your limited amount of words within your stage two proposal. So if there are graphics associated that you've developed and that you're thinking about, and if there is some kind of system of software interaction that you want to represent visually, or if there's additional content that just can't be jammed into a relatively small amount of words that you definitely think help to build out the way that your proposal is being presented, then that's the kind of content I think we're looking for in that area. It's not a requirement, it's really just to ensure that it gets all of the content that you would like to see in there.
I would only add, I mean, I agree with all of that. I would only add that in thinking about what, if any, supplementary content to add, you obviously want to be mindful that, judges are looking at vast amounts of material, and you want to add things that are only really germane to your proposal, that you think, would make your proposal better, and without which something would be missing from your proposal. Don't just throw everything in there just for the sake of throwing it in.
I think we have time for one more question. This question has to do with kids. Are there any special considerations when designing a badge system for minors?
That's a huge question, I will kind of just do some bullet points for that one. Yes, there will be considerations based on the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, so that's COPPA. There are a few federal requirements that get wrapped in. There's also FERPA, which is the Family Educational Resource Protection Act, I think. I don't know if I have that exactly right. That needs to be taken into consideration if there are assessment of learning. Also, I think the way that children interact versus the way that parents or adults interact is probably fairly different, and so they'll be looking for different things. So in that instance, it might make sense to have a series of badges that are for relatively granular skills that kids feel as though that they're moving forward through something and they're kind of leveling up constantly. Again, this is also related to, there's probably a lot of academic research that can help to define what specifically makes sense when it comes to providing educational resources, and in this instance, badged associated educational resources to children, and it depends on the age.
Well, I think we may have come to the end of our webinar, where we will be archiving our webinar for anybody who wants somebody else on the team to listen in, or you had questions and want to listen again. It will be going up on the dmlcompetition.net/blog in the next couple of days or so, or probably early next week. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Carla and David. That was, as usual, very helpful, very informative, and appreciate the time you took to help everybody ask their questions and get to know the badge system structure of the process, the competition, and the design system better. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Sure.